Hello and welcome to my video presentation. My name is Josh and today we're going to be talking about the flood as it occurs in a lot of different mythologies and sort of religious beliefs. Specifically, we're going to be looking at it in the Xia dynasty and how it kind of fits into a larger picture with other cultures believing in a similar sort of great flood story. Alright, so first of all, I think the flood story most people are familiar with is from the Bible, specifically from the Torah, which it tells the story of Noah and how God basically erased humanity off the map and gave a restart for Noah. Most people fail to mention that the same story occurs very similarly in the Quran. We also saw the flood mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The reading brings up flood stories from the Native Americans, Scandinavians. Outside the reading, you can also find flood stories in the Greeks, the Indians, and many other cultures. Another country that people will point out lacks a flood story, and they cite this as evidence that there was no such great flooding event in the sort of greater Fertile Crescent area, is Egypt. Egypt has no great flood mythology on the scale of these other cultures. That's not to say that they didn't have flood mythology, though. In fact, they did, and it was very closely tied to their number one main god called Ra, and also a relationship between them and how they depended on the flood. They depended on flooding to help produce fertile land for their crops. So they did have flood mythology, it just doesn't carry that same negative connotation that we see from other cultures. Now, it's not so easy to write all this off as myth because there is actual evidence that there may have been some sort of either great flooding event in all these areas or some sort of global flooding event. So it's not so easy to say that this is all just made up. There may have been actual events or a big event that happened to actually trigger all these mythologies based off of it. All of these different cultures having a very similar story, a very similar catastrophic event, indicates that maybe they're all pointing to the same event. Maybe not, it could be coincidence, we don't know. But there is evidence that there could have been a big global flood, and that would explain why all these cultures have all these legends based off of just one event. It would be a lot less coincidental that all these cultures independently came up with their own flood stories rather than something or some things did happen to trigger all of these stories to be made up about the same event or events. As far as the actual flood myth in China, some of the areas are pretty easy to nail down what's myth and what's reality. Like, Yu and Qi were real people, but Qi probably wasn't born of a statue and a bear, and Yu probably wasn't given his power by a deity. But there's some more gray areas that is harder to tell if they were myth or reality, like the human migration and all the disasters. Those may have actually happened. And the article brings up that some sort of big flood there probably did happen. But regardless of these events being real or mythical, they still have real impacts either way. China learned how to manage flood systems and how to manage their crops in safety during these mass flooding events. Whether that came from mythology or just from a guy who was an engineer is not so clear, but the effects are real.